Archie, should I turn on my Social Security early?
Well, Jimmy, there's a lot of reasons like health, investing, income needs, but I think that this deserves a full episode. Let's dive in. I'm Archie Hoxton.
And I'm Rob Hoxton.
And this is Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. Welcome back to the Last Paycheck Podcast, brought to you by Hoxton Planning and Management. We're your hosts, Archie Hoxton and Jimmy Sutch, and today we're talking about Social Security and really 5 reasons why you should consider taking it early. I think most of the sort of conventional wisdom or rules of thumb about Social Security are to delay it, and often to delay it as late as possible because you get the highest benefit if you do.
Right.
So your primary insurance amount or happens at full retirement age. That's where you get your full benefit. If you take it earlier, you get a decreased benefit. And if you take it later and you can delay all the way to 70, you get an increase. And it's roughly 8% increase or decrease that you when you take it early or late.
Yeah. Right. There's like 3 key ages, right? There's the 62.
Yeah.
Earliest possible, smallest benefit. There's full retirement age, which is kind of dependent on your birth year.
Most people at 67.
Around 66, 67, in between there. And then 70.
Yeah.
And like Archie said, it's very common for most folks that we work with to come in here with sometimes the fallacy that it's most beneficial to defer till 70.
Yeah.
Or as long as they can.
Yeah. Because the real answer is, as so much is in our world, is it depends. It really depends on a lot of factors, and some factors that we can't know or control. So it's not a cut and dry decision. Hey, delay it all the way to 67. Take it at full retirement. Take it as early as possible or somewhere in between.
Yeah, it definitely depends on your worries, priorities, some objectives and goals.
Your health.
Health, of course.
Let's start there because I think that's probably the most important factor, and it's also the one that we can't know or control. So we don't know how long we're going to live, but we can get some hints, roughly based on our health, based on our family history. If you have parents and grandparents who lived really long lives, that suggests that maybe you might also, but it doesn't guarantee it.
Right.
If you're in really, really good health, again, that could suggest maybe you might live a longer life.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of folks have chronic illnesses, unfortunately, these days, right? And that definitely impacts longevity.
Yeah.
Right? And you and I joke about it all the time as summer's coming, but there are some things that we can do to hopefully improve our health and improve our longevity.
Yeah.
But that's another podcast in itself, right?
Right. And a lot of that can depend on how long you've been working at that.
Right. Of course. So it's really hard to play God, but that is a critical factor, is determining or getting a sense of your perception of how long you're going to make it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because the reason why this is important is that depending on how long you live, that's going to determine how much you get on a cumulative basis over the course of your life from Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take it early and accept the smaller benefit and live a really long time, then that first few years of extra payments doesn't really outweigh if you had taken it later and gotten a higher benefit. So for example, if you delay to age 70 and you get another $10,000 a year, that extra 8 years of not having the $10,000 a year eventually is overcome by that larger benefit. And for a lot of people, that ends up being somewhere in like your early to mid 80s is where you kind of break even. So again, that's the question. Are you going to live that long? Right. And it's also not the only factor that we should be thinking about when we're trying to figure out when we should take.
And for most people, you get to a retirement age and again, you don't worry about saving in retirement until you get really close to it, unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
Like most people. And So not everyone necessarily retires with an enormous nest egg that, they can live off dividends and interest.
Right.
Right. So you get to the age of, you want to hang up your cleats or no longer work. And sometimes you need the income, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't have the nest egg that supports your lifestyle and you need that Social Security income, which was essentially a forced savings for the last 30 or 40 years, depending on how long you worked. But,
Yeah.
sometimes you actually don't have the nimbleness or flexibility to defer it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that fair?
Because you could also get forced into retirement and have no other choice. Or you could have done some planning and figured out that, okay, with the size that my nest egg is, I can reasonably generate X amount in income. If I pair that with Social Security now and say maybe you're 64, 65, so you're not quite full retirement age, or 62 or whatever it is, and you put that together and you say, I can live on that I can make that work and it's worth it to me to go ahead and retire. So I want to retire early, but I can't do it without taking the Social Security early as well.
What about the folks that worry, or I guess should say prioritize the succession of their assets, right? Say Social Security isn't a huge component of their overall income, right? But they really do prioritize, the succession or giving assets to the next generation. Where does that fall?
Yeah. So it depends on the other factors too. But if we just isolate this one and look at it, if you were to take your benefit early, and now you don't really want to be working, like this kind of is like once you've retired, because one of the catches with Social Security is that if you're working and then you file for Social Security and it's before full retirement age, your benefit is reduced.
Right.
So this is sort of like if you retire early.
Let's say you hit FRA or full retirement age and your priority is to make sure you have as much in terms of a nest egg to pass on to the next generation.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this case, and this works really well, like if you have a pension, you have other income, you don't necessarily need the Social Security for income. If you could take that money and invest it, right? And you can invest it aggressively so that you could earn more than, say, that 8% that's guaranteed by the Social Security Administration. And then the idea there is what you're doing is you're prioritizing getting the money from Social Security and putting it in an account that can be inherited and can grow.
Yeah, Archie and I encounter this quite a bit with quite a few folks. And I think the biggest blunder for some of the folks that we get to work with is, their concern is that one, maybe the assets won't always be there, but at the very least, if something happens to them and they're not lucky enough to make it for a long time, those assets that they had saved with the federal government, Social Security, if something happens to them, they can't have that bucket of money and it go to their wife, right? Their spousal benefits and things like that. But it's not a great tool for those dollars to go to other folks, right?
Yeah. Or if you're unmarried, I mean, you've paid into that a long time. So in one sense, it's, I want to capture those dollars I paid in now. I want to invest them. I want them in my pocket. And then I want them in my spouse or children's pocket long term.
Right.
Now you have to balance that with other factors, like if you live a long life and you end up drawing down on your portfolio more heavily than had you just waited and delayed and gotten a higher benefit, then you have to factor, okay, how does this affect my break-even point? Is this actually adding much, or would I have been better off delaying? So you have to kind of balance these together. So like we said, you're balancing your priorities, what's important to you, what gives you peace of mind.
Expected longevity, right?
Longevity, what you actually need to do, what your financial situation kind of demands. Like you might need the income.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of folks, I think, we just talked about their concern about having assets in a bucket of money that you can't really pass on. right? A lot of the same folks have the worry of kind of the solvency, right, of the Social Security Administration and if those benefits are going to be there. So it kind of plays into some of your perception of just Social Security in general, and some of your considerations when it comes to generally how it's managed.
Yeah, I mean that's a big one. I get that all the time,
All the
especially
time.
recently,
Right?
and that's one that I like to put some historical context to that, and just basically say, hey, we've been here before. We have almost run out of money in the Social Security Trust. This has happened before, and we've come out of it. And the way we came out of it last time was more taxes. And probably the way we come out of it this time is, again, more taxes. There's a ton of room for the government to raise tax on Social Security. They can tax the benefit 100%. They only tax it up to 85 right now. They can raise or even remove the cap on Social Security earnings, like the portion of your earnings that can be taxed for it. It's capped at around 170,000 right now. They can remove that and tax it all like they do with Medicare. So there's tons and tons of room to raise tax, and that's probably what will happen.
And even outside of taxes, I think we've seen this too, is they continue to kind of defer for retirement age.
That too,
right?
Yeah.
Right. So people are expected to live longer. When this was, put into place, people certainly weren't living quite as long as they are now.
Right.
Right. So a little bit less money in terms of the amount of time that you have it turned on, but because you're expected to live longer, they'll continue to defer that age, most likely.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, Archie and I don't have a concern about those benefits not being there to some extent when everybody, including young folks, get to retirement.
There's a lot of ways that it can be.
But if you are one of those people that worry about that, and we meet these people often, sometimes it's a little bit of peace of mind to say, I'm going to take the money while I believe it's going to be there.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, as with any of these decisions, you may end up regretting it down the road, because as we learn more about our situation, we learn, oh, wow, hang on a sec. I'm 87 this year. Darn, I should have delayed to 70. But you can't really, we don't have that benefit until we're looking back in hindsight. You can't make decisions like that. So making decisions off of balancing like peace of mind and these other factors, I think is totally valid.
Right.
Another one that is kind of niche, and we'll cover it quickly, but we see this a lot with spouses who say maybe they have an age gap, and one has a substantial Social Security benefit and the other has a Social Security benefit on their own earnings record that's less than 50% of the spouse with the larger benefit. What we sometimes see is the spouse with the larger benefit ends up delaying, whether it's to 67 or to 70. What the spouse with the smaller benefit can do is they can just file at 62 and start collecting their own benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they do that for a couple years, and then the older spouse gets to age, or I guess the age can vary, but then the spouse with the larger benefit hits age 70 and files, and then the spouse with the smaller benefit switches to the larger benefit earnings record,
right,
and gets 50% of that. So maybe they're making $10,000 a year on Social Security, and this spouse is going to make $40,000 when they delay. Now this spouse collects $10,000 for a few years and then switches to $20,000.
Right.
So that's a way that you can maximize sort of this difference in benefit levels, potentially difference in age that can really work in your favor.
Yeah, we love that strategy because it's twofold, right? There's a little dichotomy to it. You can address cash flow needs now, right? But then at the same time, kind of address this long-term concern because none of us know when we're going to go upstairs.
Right.
Right. So you can increase your cash flow for the future and those unknown years, but at the same time, get a couple extra dollars in your pocket.
Yeah. And because the alternative would just be waiting until the other spouse with the larger benefit files and getting 50% of it. But then you miss those few years that you could have been collecting 10 grand a year.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So you're getting more out of the system. So, that's just another kind of more niche strategy that's worth mentioning. So I mean, health concerns, income needs, investing and legacy planning, Social Security solvency, maximizing your household benefits when there's a big differential in the benefits. These are all good reasons to consider filing early that you don't hear much because, like I said, the general rule of thumb is delaying is best. But we're not huge fans of rules of thumb because they miss individual circumstances and priorities and goals. So that I would say that's about it for today. So if you like the episode, or if you want to hear more, if you have topics that you'd like to hear, leave us a comment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for notifications. Like the video as well if you enjoyed the content, and share it with your family and friends, and we'll hope to see you next time. You've been watching Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. If you like this show, be sure to hit like and subscribe. Last Paycheck is available anywhere you get your podcasts.